Welcome back to the channel. I've often wondered if, being the age that I am, getting into heavier music around 1987, if I missed the classical period of metal and that experience is impossible to replicate, or if I had it slightly better for other reasons. Like, for instance, I wasn't there when Metallica and Slayer released their first records. I wasn't there to buy the first 4 Venom records, the classic era, as brand new releases. But I also was still a young fan from 1987 through the 80s. I saw the peak of the thrash scene. I saw the beginnings and the fulfillment of the death metal scene. I would later see the black metal scene unfold. And so I saw all those eras. But a lot of albums that came out, that I would get in retrospect, I had no ability to get. For instance, like this Exhumer album right here, Possessed by Fire, which is just amazing, harsh German thrash. This album had all of 4 pressings, one in 1986, one in 1987, one in 1988, and also an additional one in 1986. But from 1988 until 2001, this album was completely out of print. So this band in particular was one that I had heard of back in the early 90s, but I actually didn't have the opportunity to own it used until quite a few years later, probably around 1995 or so. Back in 1989, I was listening to a lot of stuff, not this particular band, but a lot of kind of underground stuff like this, but I didn't have the actual proper albums. I had recorded tapes. And I remember in 1989, because I remember specifically I was going into 8th grade, when I hit 100 official tapes, and then I had about maybe 15 or 20 CDs, and then I had an equal amount of albums, about 100, 115 or so tapes that were recordings of albums that I didn't own the physical copy of. But that was it. That was all I could do, is I had to get that stuff. And so anyway, so albums like this, some of them I heard through tape-traded tapes or recordings from older guys that I would occasionally stumble across. But if I couldn't trade it from somebody or find it used somewhere, I oftentimes had to go without. So I guess that would be one of the downfalls. Whereas if I had been an older fan, in 1986, I would have bought this as a brand new album, and I surely would have, given my taste in music. So anyway. Poison, the German band, The Awakening of the Dead. This was a demo from 1986. This band put out no official releases in the 80s, just demos. A lot of demos. But from what I understand, in the underground German metal scene, this band was pretty widely known and highly regarded. This is definitely a death thrash band. A lot of that very heavy stuff going on here. It reminds me a lot of the later 80s stuff that was really violent, like Morbid Saint, maybe a little Devastation, Demolition Hammer. So 1986, pretty cool. It's a bit of it's a demo, so it sounds like a demo if you can handle that type of sound, though. But it is a historical piece for sure. Everything this band did is a historical piece. If you want to hear kind of what was going on the street level, this is a good way to do it. Poison. And sticking with the German theme, talk about German thrash metal. This band was a little bit ahead of the pack, I feel like. Musicianship-wise, they were a little bit more advanced. Also with this band, given what I was talking about earlier, how I came into the scene as a younger kid later, by around 87, I was lucky enough to find all of this stuff used on CD and tape and vinyl, actually. I found Sentence of Death was actually the first one that I found, and I had no idea what it was or any of that, so definitely opened my eyes. And that was early on. That was on Destruction. I had started kind of looking for this stuff around 1990, and I don't think I found one until... I know I was listening to this by the summer of 1991. It was used, but by the time that this was their second full-length album, by the time this one had come out, they had advanced even more, and they were becoming quite the musical force. They got the songs, they got just everything down here. It's such a good record. Life Without Sense. Eternal Ban, obviously, upcoming Devastation. Really, really good. Recorded in April of 86. So this is another one of those early German thrash albums from one of the pioneering bands of the scene, for sure.
Okay, we go back to the old days. You know, when we started heavy metal, there was no death metal, heavy metal, power metal, prog metal, blah, blah, blah. It was just heavy metal, you know? And the whole thing was unity. And those days when I come to Wacken, I can feel the unity here in the fucking air. This is what heavy metal makes the difference between heavy metal and other music. We don't need fucking colors or countries. We love the music. We love to be different. This one is called Eternal Ban! I want to see some fucking hands in the air, Wacken! Hey, hey, hey!
Sodom, Obsessed by Cruelty, another one of those bands. From what I understand, back in the old days, before they had all the different genres that they were calling everything, this band called their own music witching metal, whatever that means. Retroactively, they've been called everything thrash, black and death, and every combination of or variation of those genres. But to me, it's Sodom. It's just metal. But it's really good thrash metal. I've talked about this one before. I was lucky enough to find some of this early stuff very early on in the 90s, but also I had found Persecution Mania, Agent Orange, and Better Off Dead early on. So by 1989, I was buying Agent Orange new. This is on the Steamhammer label, but this is one of the SPV. SPV was one of the two major labels that kind of jump-started this entire scene, and that would be Noise Records, SPV, and then later on, they all kind of came in, but the next main one probably, aside from like the Steamhammer labels and those that were distribution labels, for these albums, Century Media was formed, I think, in 87 or 88, and I believe it was formed to put out Despair Records. And I don't know if that was the only intention and it just kind of went from there or what, but anyway, that's what happened. But so, by the early 90s, whenever I would see the SPV label or the Noise Records, and with Noise Records, it was earlier because I was already buying some Noise Records stuff in 88 and 89. And so whenever I saw that label, I would buy it. Of course, my buying power was more diminished at that point because I was still a kid. But as time would go on, especially by 1992, where I was actually making paychecks, if I wasn't in school, I was pretty much working. So I was spending most of that money on gas to get to the record store, eating on the way there, and buying all the records I could, tapes, CDs, and records, any combination that I could that would get the most amount. Previous to that, it was probably an average of about 3 albums a month that I would manage to get, and that was with that was purchasing. I may or may not have been able to find somebody that had something I needed or wanted in their own collection, and I would tape trade them for it, or buy it from, or trade something for it, usually bike parts or skateboard parts or something. But yeah, good old Sodom, one of the cornerstones of German thrash, one of the early bands. This band had demos out in 1983. Great stuff.
My favorite band, I'm an all-time, old-school metal fan. You know, my bands from the first hour, like Venom. You know, my favorite band was Tank. All the bands coming from the new wave of British heavy metal bands. You know, that's what I like. When I listen to music at home, I always get a Raven or get old school music like Judas Priest, you know, and Venom, the old Motorhead, you know. I don't know, there are so much bands coming out every month, you know, in Germany or in Europe, whatever. I never mind, you know. I don't have the money to buy everything. I don't have the time to listen to anything. So when I listen to music, I get a Venom album or Slayer, whatever.
This is another one. This was put out early 1986, more German thrash. Death Row was among the bands like Destruction that were considered to be, musicianship-wise, they were considered to be a little bit ahead of the pack. And you can hear already on this record what this band was capable of. One of the other bands that comes to mind is Angel Dust. But Angel Dust, Death Row, and Destruction all kind of they were just like an upper tier in the music department. Whereas, you know, Sodom and a few Exhumer, these other bands, they were great. The riffs, everything was there, but they were more primal. And they wouldn't yet be up to that musical level until just a little bit later on with some later albums. But every one of them had their place. But anyway, the first Death Row record, I just love this record. I love this whole band. Pretty much love everything they did. But these early records are great. I didn't even know they existed, the first 2 records. I bought their 3rd record, and I thought that was their first record for a long time. I was on the Noise Records. And it would be in the mid-90s, I think, Goldmine magazine, if you ever read Goldmine music magazine. It is just like eBay, but it was in a magazine. You'd go in there and you could look up complete discographies of all kinds of stuff and sellers and everything from all around the world. And let me tell you, those were rough days. You would, you might decide to buy something. You'd have to get a mail order. Then you would send it, postage paid. So you'd send that out and you would just forget about it. It'd be 3 months sometimes before anything would come back to you, that you bought. And also it was a grading magazine. So it would give like out grades for, the value of albums and stuff. And I remember, Explorer, Symphonies of Steel, that album was going for $400 in that magazine back around 1992 or something. Because I'm telling you, every one of these albums was out of print. Every one of them. Nothing was in print. There wouldn't be a real true reissue campaign starting to happen until the mid and late 90s. Century Media, Nuclear Blast, whoever it was, there was a bunch of people that would sporadically put out different stuff. Even Megaforce Records tried to get going again and did a few things. But yeah, you know, that's the world that I grew up in, the out of print world, where I had to buy everything used. And in some cases like this, I didn't even know it existed. There just was no record, no pun intended, that anything like this existed in the world. And in a way, I'm kind of glad I didn't know, because I would have lost more sleep worrying about how I was going to get all these records. Because once I get an album by a band and I like it, I want to get all their stuff. I want to hear everything they did. I like to see the trajectory that they went on. I like to hear the progression. So, when they pivot and they go here or they go there, I want to try to understand why. I want to get in the head of the musicians and their creation. And so it bothers me when I know that there's more albums out there in a discography and it's a missing link to me. It's like I have parts of the picture, but I don't have a full picture, because how can I? Haven't heard the entire body of work. And that has always been one of my things. That's one of the reasons why I continue to buy records all the time. Just always wanting to know more and more and more and more. And of course, these become a historical piece. Each piece in the collection is of historical value, like a book, like in a library. You want to learn about the history of German metal, like we're kind of talking about right now a little bit, then you can pull all these discographies off the shelf and you can start going through. In some cases, I'll even have demos, and you can start going through. You can hear some live albums sometimes, if they've put them out, hear how they were doing, hear the progression from one record to the next or not. You can hear where Kreator decided that they weren't going to be, a thrash band anymore, or Destruction put out albums that nobody understands for a little while. The long lost Sodom records, there's all kinds of cool stuff like that to check out and kind of see. Even lyrically, you can kind of see how bands matured. Some of these albums were written when these guys were 18, 19, 20 years old. And then you've got an album that was written 10 years after that. Well, they're supposed to be 10 years more mature, and in a lot of cases they are, especially musically. You see that advancement all the time. And so that's one of the things I just love. And I think that metal is just so perfect for that entire thing, because a lot of these bands, they may have got some sort of a living off of their music, like, maybe they did. I don't know. A lot of these bands still continued to work. I remember reading Metal Maniacs interviews with bands from the 80s, and, not the big ones, but like the underground ones. And they were done around work schedules. They would talk about like, oh, this piece of this song was written during lunch at work, and then they continue to work. They continue to do that, and then they do this stuff because they love it. I don't know that there was a whole lot of aspiration for success that was going to make them rich or even financially stable. And a lot of these bands did live in poverty when they tried to do this as their job, just music. So anyway, all of that is fascinating to me, and I just love it. German bands, German thrash bands, they all sound German. I get that. But if someone was to point and say, what is the one album that just specifically hones in on the style of those bands, this is one of the records I would point to. Well executed, violent thrash. Hanging on to a little bit of that punk edge underneath the music. And it retains the speed of that. The riffs are super fast. They're not real rigid. They're kind of like, how much can we play really fast, And the vocals are pure German. I love these bands. I think one of the reasons why the German vocalists were so appealing to me is the grit in their voice. And really what that was is a lot of these bands, now I only speak one language, so take that for what it's worth. But a lot of the German bands, a lot of these guys, they all spoke English as a second language, if not a broken second language. Yet most of them did their lyrics in English, and so when they're belting out these English words in their thick German accent, it was really coming across in a way that was so pleasing to the ear for thrash. You know, like the only U.S. thrash band that had it originally was Slayer, and that was because Tom Araya had that deep kind of voice that I think has to have something to do with his ancestry over there in Chile. Just the way his voice came through. It was harsh. It was how would you say, just in your face, but it also had like dimensions to it. And the German bands have that, like Millie from Kreator is another example, Sodom, all those bands, you know. But anyway, this was a great record, the first two records especially. And this was another one that I was really lucky to find. It was in the cutout bin way back in the late 80s or early 90s when I found it. I think this is my first copy, the Steamhammer version one. But again, it was another time where I had stumbled across this record, and had no idea what that band was. They could have gone a few different ways. The guy's wearing a Metallica shirt, and I remember thinking, well, that could be beneficial. But yep, Assassin, pure German thrash. First two records are essential. This one is absolutely special. I think that this is just a really, really good example of what that scene had to offer in 1986. And in 1986, the people in charge of this, the Noise Records, Karl Ulrich Walterbach, and the owner of SPV Records, they were watching what was going on in America. They saw Slayer, Hell Awaits come out. They saw Metallica, Ride the Lightning come out, and they started to see the scene and what was going on there. And they were like, something's happening over there. These bands are getting kind of big. And they're like, we want that too. And that they went to go find it. And that's where they found a lot of these bands. And really, really great stuff. This is a total classic. Holy Moses, Queen of Siam, also from 1986. More German thrash. This band, they were around before all the other ones. They date back to 1980. 1980 they came out. And this is some pretty vicious thrash as well. As I was talking about in my last video, this band has a female vocalist, and what was said was that she could keep up with anybody, and she does. She definitely has a style and a sound, and can be a little bit hard to get into in spots, but it is pretty good. This is a great thrash record. Remember how I was talking about Carl and the whoever the owner was from SPV? They were looking for all these bands. Well, they found this band pretty far out. This was not part of the actual scene, but they had been around for a long time. I think that they were near the Belgian border, closer to that. But so they did have a little bit of a different sound than some of these other bands that were within a few cities of each other. But once again, this is a pretty classic record. I remember I found this and their second record at the same time while I was on vacation, and that was both a blessing and a curse. For one, I was happy to have them, but for two, I was gone for like a week and had no way to listen to it. So I'm staring at it, wanting to hear it so bad, but had no idea what it sounded like. Nothing. Anyway, more essential German thrash from 1986. People are divided about this one, only because they either like Endless Pain more or Pleasure to Kill more. But by the time this album came out, it was their second record from 1986, German Thrash. They had improved and advanced not only in the recording techniques, but in the musicianship, the writing, straight across the board. This is a ripping record from start to finish. And it was one of those ones where I didn't even know it existed until maybe 89 or 90. I would see the little things in magazines, but I had no chance to hear this until around 1993, maybe. There was a reissue campaign, and I was able to get it with the Flag of Hate EP on CD from Noise Records. I don't remember what year they put this out, but they were starting to do some reissues finally after years of being out of print. And so that's how I heard it. Of course, this is the Ultra reissue, the remastered version. So this is my vinyl version with all the additional stuff. It's got the Flag of Hate EP on it, which I love. But yes, this one, kind of like The Assassin, I would point to this record as one of the pinnacle albums of German thrash, especially in the year 1986. And I've pinpointed 1986 because that seems to be the year when a lot of bands were kind of lining up. They were kind of in lockstep almost. It was like you could look at 1986 and you can tell, I mean, there is a German scene. Now you had the American scene, the San Francisco scene, the Florida scene, I guess, would be included in that a little bit. And then you had now the German scene. And of course, we would get the Swedish and the British and the Brazilian, which I'm learning a lot about the Brazilian underground right now, which is really fascinating because there just seems to be no end to the amount of music that was released that I had never heard of before. So this being a scene that I've explored for decades at this point. But one of my favorite German thrash records. I got into the Kreator band back when they released Extreme Aggression. So that was my first introduction. And the next one that I purchased was Coma of Souls. And then I think I found Terrible Certainty. I found Terrible Certainty on tape, I think. And so I was able to hear that. And I found the Flag of Hate EP on vinyl in the early 90s, if not 1990. And so that was kind of my Kreator world for a while. But, yep, fantastic stuff.
Pleasure to kill. Yes, under the key of time.
Necronomicon, the debut album, I was very late to this band, and it was only because I could not find the albums. I finally started finding them used in the early 2000s, so I was very late to this band. This particular album is probably my favorite one of their initial run. They had quite a bit of a mixture of like Sodom and Kreator kind of mixed together. The recording is not in and of itself that great. It's a little thin. Also a 1986 record. Anyway, just pretty straightforward thrash. No bells and whistles. Pretty stripped down. It's very raw. But again, being that it was from 1986, and it's right there, you know, with all those German thrash bands. So it was part of the movement. It was definitely part of the scene. And this album, especially, I think it's important to the scene, especially the song like Possessed by Evil or Blind Destruction. It does have a bit of a punk edge as well. There is some punk going on underneath there. I think it's interesting that they look like a punk band, if you can see that. But yep, another one. Good record.
He's possessed by evil! His parents saw his tears. The neighbor, yeah, the panic. He doesn't play the normal games.
I don't know if I remember this correctly about this band Tankard, but I think that Carl didn't initially want to sign these guys. And I don't remember if it was because they only sang about beer or if it was because he didn't think they were very good musicians. But when I listen to even this first record, I'm always blown away by what they've accomplished here. Not only is the album fun, but it's really well executed thrash. Every song. It's got some details to it. It's got a good sound. It's effective. It's got some really, really good riffs on it. Strong riffs, great musicianship, I think, and I love the vocals. And I just like their style. The whole idea of the every song being about beer or close to it is really funny to me. But it's also amazing that they managed to put out so many records with the same theme, and somehow it just works, even to the point where you might just ignore the lyrics sometimes. This is another time where the first two records, I had no idea they existed until later. I thought that The Morning After was the first record for a while before I finally discovered that they had other records. And then tracking them down was a whole nother story. And once again, it was just kind of harkening back to that idea that I came up during a time when these bands had already had a couple of runs through albums. Some of them had jumped labels to a different label or a different distribution or whatever, and they were out of print. Albums were just out of print everywhere back then. It was terrible. But I love Tankard. I especially love the first three records the very most. I think those are essential listening. But great record if you haven't heard it.
Looking back 35 years ago, and we were really glad to join these times when everything started up. I mean, we were grown up with a new wave of British heavy metal, and we were influenced by that. And later on, of course, with a Bay Area thrash wave, first Exodus, first Slayer, first Metallica, and I always mention the first Exciter, Heavy Metal Maniac. So these were our real main influences. Everything was new, heavy metal was new, and
Angel Dust, more German thrash, 1986, Into the Dark Past. I got into this band after they reformed, and I think it was in 1997 or 1998 when they put out the Bleed album, and that's where I caught up to them. And so then I went backwards and bought the one album that came up before that, and then I thought, well, that's cool, you know, and everything else, but I then started to hear rumblings around the year 2000 or maybe 1999 that they actually had two albums in the 80s. I'm like, oh man. So eBay was maybe a thing. Anyway, online was just starting to become kind of a thing. You could search and maybe find something, and distribution labels like Century Media and stuff had gone live. And so you could search through there, and sometimes you might find a used CD of this, but it was $100 or more in 1990s money. So I went with bootlegs. I had bootlegs of the first two records for years before I finally got a proper reissue. And then I did track down some original copies eventually when the price came down and nobody cared anymore. And anyway, my collection is complete. But here's another one. Very musical, very advanced, very good songwriting, vicious vocals, just great thrash metal, technical thrash metal. Once again, part of the German scene, 1986. Good stuff.
Fighting my fight to survive. I never come from my eyes. And I won't take your life. You gotta get out of my way. I go through hell, fight till the end. I'm ready to strike. I'll make you run for your life, and you cannot hide. This is the finest return. Cities will burn. This is the finest return.
So this was just a little bit of a trip down German metal lane. All the albums I showed were from 1986. It was inspired by something I had seen recently where they were talking about a bunch of German stuff from the early 80s on through the late 80s. And I got to thinking about all the great records that came out in 1986. And so I thought I would just pull 9 or 10 of them out and just talk a little bit about them. But I'm also really curious, like, about your experiences with any of these records, how you would rate them in comparison to others in the scene. Albums that you would consider to be cornerstone that are not listed, that I didn't just show. And of course, if you're in the scene, I always love hearing from you guys. There's a lot of really cool people that comment in the comments, and they lived through that era. They live in that era, in those areas. And I'm always really, really excited to hear those stories. And also, it's really cool because other people read those comments too. And they kind of either live vicariously through your stories in the comments, or they also are influenced to find the albums that you're talking about. So you're kind of carrying on the legacy in your own way, which is really great. And I have found a lot of cool information that I didn't know through the comments and through you guys, and albums too that I also didn't know and needed to go find. So if you made it through this long form video, I appreciate it and thank you. And I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.
Came up with the AC/DC If You Want Blood album, and since these days I'm really infected with hard music, and yeah, I couldn't really imagine a life without metal.